Okay, so let's talk about a guy you've probably never heard of. But get this, he's credited with saving more lives than literally any other person in human history. We're talking about the man who saved 1 billion lives.
You gotta understand, back in the 60s, this kind of prediction wasn't some sci-fi fantasy. It was a terrifyingly real forecast from the world's top thinkers. I mean, the global population was just exploding, but our food supply, it just couldn't keep up. The math was simple, and honestly, it was pretty grim. It pointed to one thing: mass starvation.
So what if the key to humanity's future, the thing that would save us, wasn't some high-tech gadget, but was hiding in a single field of wheat? Yeah, it sounds a little like science fiction, right? But this story isn't about spaceships. It's about wheat, and it's about how one guy's relentless work in a field literally changed the course of history.
All right, Section 1, A World on the Brink. To really get a feel for just how huge this accomplishment was, we have to go back and see what the world was up against. I mean, we were on the brink of a massive and what seemed like an impossible challenge.
Okay, the man from Iowa, an unlikely hero. You see, to solve a crisis this big, the world didn't get some hero in a cape. Nope. It got something way more unlikely: the stubborn son of an Iowa farmer. So let's meet the man of the hour.
So this is Norman Borlaug, and his roots, well, they're about as humble as it gets. Born in 1914 in a tiny Iowa town, the great-grandson of Norwegian immigrants. He grew up on a family farm and went to a one-room schoolhouse. His whole childhood was just the farm, the practical, non-stop rhythm of farm life, and that forged a work ethic in him that, as you'll see, was absolutely essential.
It was actually his grandfather who told him, "You're wiser to fill your head now if you want to fill your belly later on." And that advice is what pushed him off the farm and toward the University of Minnesota. But you can see that farm-bred toughness right away, because he actually failed the entrance exam the first time he took it. But he didn't give up. He literally had to fight just to get in the door.
And this is what's so fascinating about Borlaug. He was this amazing mix of brawn and brains. On one side, you have the wrestler. He was a legit college wrestler who made it to the Big Ten semifinals. His coach taught him to always give 105%, and he said wrestling made him tough. Then you have the scientist. He got a PhD in plant pathology, inspired by lectures about these shifty little enemies that destroy our food. He made it his life's work to fight a fungus called stem rust.
And for him, this wasn't just some abstract academic problem. No, this was deeply, deeply personal. See, back in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, he worked with the Civilian Conservation Corps. He saw starving men, and he saw how a little bit of food could totally transform them. He said later, "All of this left scars on me." And that memory, that scar, is what drove everything he was about to do.
So you take that personal drive, you add in the mind of a scientist and the grit of a wrestler, and you get a revolution. Which brings us to our next section: revolution in a wheat field. He took that unique skill set south to a series of dusty experimental wheat fields in Mexico. And this is where the whole thing really kicks off. So in 1944, Borlaug heads down to Mexico to run this small wheat research program. And for the next, almost 20 years, he just grinds. He starts this controversial technique called shuttle breeding in 45. In 53, he gets his hands on this key ingredient, a Japanese semi-dwarf wheat variety. And through it all, he's battling skeptical bosses, brutal heat, and just countless failed experiments. But by 1963, because of his sheer persistence, Mexico, a country that used to import grain, was now exporting it. A total turnaround. And this shuttle breeding thing, this just shows you what a genius he was. See, his bosses told him it was a terrible idea, that the seeds needed a rest period. He actually threatened to quit over it. But by moving the seeds between two totally different climates every year, 700 miles apart, he did something incredible. Not only did he double the speed of his research, but he accidentally created wheat varieties that were uniquely adaptable to all kinds of conditions all over the world. A total game changer.
But there was another huge problem he had to solve. It was basically an engineering problem. When he added fertilizer to make the wheat grow better, the stalks got all tall and spindly, and they'd produce all this heavy grain and then just collapse under their own weight. It's called lodging. So his brilliant solution was to crossbreed his wheat with that short, sturdy Japanese variety. The result? Short, stocky little wheat plants with strong stalks that could actually support all the extra grain. They could handle their own success.
And there it was. That was the result. He had done it. He'd created a kind of super wheat, high yield, resistant to disease, and able to grow almost anywhere. You could say he had forged his weapon in the war against hunger. Now, he just had to get it to the front lines.
All right, next up, the battle to feed humanity, the Green Revolution.
And this is where the story shifts gears. It goes from a quiet science project in Mexico to a high-stakes geopolitical drama. Borlaug is about to take his seeds to the one place that needed them most, the famine-threatened nations of South Asia.
But just getting the seeds there was, well, it was an absolute nightmare. I mean, look at this list of problems. Everything that could possibly go wrong did. First, Mexican customs holds up the shipment. Then, the convoy of trucks has to detour around the Watts riots in LA. A bank refuses to cash Pakistan's check because of 3 misspelled words. And then, you can't make this up, just 12 hours after the freighter finally leaves port, war breaks out between India and Pakistan. It was just one disaster after another.
But they got there. And when those seeds were finally planted, the results were immediate and just staggering. In Pakistan, the wheat yield nearly doubled in just 5 years, from 4.6 million tons to 7.3. In India, it jumped from 12.3 million tons to over 20 million. The harvest was so massive, so unbelievably huge, that in some places they ran out of space to store it all. They literally had to shut down schools to use them as grain silos.
That's when people started calling it the Green Revolution. And the impact, well, the numbers are hard to pin down exactly. But today, Norman Borlaug is widely credited with saving over 1 billion people from starving to death. 1 billion. And for all his work, in 1970, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And you know, it just shows you what kind of guy he was. He was out working in a field near Mexico City when his wife drove out to tell him the news. And his first reaction wasn't joy or pride. He was convinced it was a hoax. He just couldn't believe it.
But hold on, the story doesn't just end there with a Nobel Prize and a happily ever after. Because the Green Revolution, for all of its incredible success, it also left behind a really complex and honestly, a very controversial legacy.
So what is his legacy? I mean, how are we supposed to remember this guy? On one hand, he is the hero, the father of the Green Revolution, who saved 1 billion lives, won every major war you can think of, and even prevented massive deforestation. But then you have the criticisms, that he created a world dependent on chemical fertilizers and pesticides, that he widened the gap between rich and poor farmers, hurt biodiversity, and mostly benefited big corporations. It's not a simple answer.
You know, Borlaug himself was a fierce defender of his work right up until the end. He basically said that many of his critics were elitists, people who had never, ever experienced the physical sensation of hunger. He argued that you can't sit in a comfortable office in a rich country and tell a starving person what kind of farming they should or shouldn't be doing.
And this gets to the core of his defense, something we now call the Borlaug hypothesis. His argument was simple. Yeah, high-yield farming isn't perfect, but it's essential for saving the environment. Why? Because if you can grow way more food on the farmland you already have, you don't have to chop down rainforests and destroy wilderness to create new farms. It's a trade-off.
And man, this guy never stopped fighting. He continued working well into his 90s, trying to bring his methods to Africa. He believed the battle against hunger was a permanent war, and you always needed new technology, new innovation. He was in the fight right up until he died in 2009 at the age of 95.
And all of this leaves us with a pretty big question, right? Borlaug's Green Revolution fed the 20th century. It solved the problem of his time and stopped a global catastrophe. But what's going to feed the 21st century? His story isn't just about the past. It's a direct challenge to all of us, right now, to figure out what comes next.